Thank you, Manish. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you and all your loved ones are keeping healthy and safe. Thank you for joining us today for the second edition of Amazon Smbhav. I'm delighted to have with me here Andy Jassy, CEO AWS and the incoming CEO of Amazon. Welcome, Andy, to Amazon Smbhav. And thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Let's get started. It's been 24 years for you at Amazon, a company you joined fresh out of your graduate school. It's been an amazing journey. I've seen you close. I've had the great opportunity to work with you, and it's, in hindsight, has been a great decision for you to join Amazon. But I'm sure people out here would love to know what attracted you to Amazon in the first place.
Yeah, it's been a crazy adventure, and I feel very lucky to have been part of it. I was finishing up graduate school, as you alluded to, in 1997, and I was from the East Coast of the United States. My then fiance, now wife, was from the West Coast of the United States. So I agreed that I would move to the West Coast for 3 years, as long as she agreed that we would go back to New York, which is where I'm from, in 3 years. We actually signed our names to this agreement on a napkin in a bar when we were making the decision, which, of course, 24 years later, I've been told that the statute of limitations on that napkin has expired. But, I took my last final exam the first Friday of May in 1997, and I joined Amazon 2 days later on that Monday. And I didn't know what I was going to do or what team I was going to be on, but it was really important to Amazon that I start them. And so I came and I started really in an 8-person marketing group where all the jobs were too big for each of us, and we just split them all up. And in the beginning, I was asked to lead competitive intelligence for the company and customer retention. I did that for a little bit, and then I was asked to work on this SWOT team project where we explored other product categories Amazon should consider getting into before the brand cemented as a books-only brand. I looked at music, and a peer looked at video and software, and we decided we'd pursue them all. And then, we really had to decide, should we build it or should we try and buy something to get started? And when we looked at it at that time, we thought it made more sense to build it. And I then went back and built out our customer relationship marketing team, which I did for about a year and a half. I had a direct response marketing experience, which made sense to work in that area. And then I went back to music and led product management and the music business for a while. And then I went back to marketing and co-led marketing for about a year before doing this unusual job, which I know you did as well, Amit, in shadowing Jeff Bezos, who's our founder. And that was an incredibly interesting experience where, we spent all of our time together and debriefed, every few days on how to divide and conquer the things to follow up on. And for him, it was a way to extend his bandwidth. And for us, it was a great way to see other parts of the business that we didn't get to see when we were running functional areas. And I left that shadow job in the fall of 2003 to go explore whether there might be a business in building a set of infrastructure services that could comprise a technology infrastructure platform that developers and companies could build their applications on top of, and that became AWS. So I did not envision that when I thought about coming to Amazon. I really was attracted to Amazon because it was very customer oriented. I'd never seen a company that was so focused on customers and that everything worked backwards from there. And a group of people that were that missionary and hungry to reinvent the number of customer experiences that actually were fairly obvious were ready to be reinvented. And I just feel lucky I got to be part of it all this time, and it's still pretty early days for us.
Yeah, that's an inspiring story. I remember it just feels just like yesterday, having seen you in some of those roles. Now, we have thousands of entrepreneurs with us today, and many of them are loyal AWS customers. I'm sure they would love to know, how did the idea of AWS come about?
Well, it was not a single aha moment, and it was a few things that were happening, I'd say, between the years 2000 and 2003 that made us think this was an interesting idea to consider. The first was, I know something you were involved in as well, which was we had this business called Merchant.com, where we provided e-commerce technology to third-party e-commerce merchants. So the technology that was on Target's website or Marks and Spencer, that was Amazon's e-commerce technology. And to provide that solution for third parties, we had to take our various technology services that have become pretty jumbled together, growing fast for 7 or 8 years of Amazon, and decouple those and provide the capabilities through application programming interfaces or APIs. And that experience of having to decouple and build in hardened APIs that were well documented was pretty seminal, as you remember, in the company. We got religion pretty quickly about building in a service-oriented architecture fashion. And we expected all of our internal teams to start building that way so other internal teams could consume that way. And so that was a big shift inside the company around the year 2000. We became a services company with really little fanfare externally, but it changed how we thought about software. And then the second thing going on was that we were taking a lot longer to deliver software projects than we thought we should. And teams would always say, well, if I had more people, this would get done faster. And then in 2002 and 2003, we're adding a lot of software engineers, and the projects were still taking all the same amount of time. And I was working for Jeff at that time as his shadow, and he was very frustrated by this fact. And I went and talked to a lot of the product leaders because I'd been at the company for a while and knew them. And they would say, well, I think it's great that you guys think we should be able to launch these services end to end in 3 or 4 months, but I'm spending 3 months just on the storage piece or just on the database part or the hosting part or the analytics. And so that was pretty interesting. We realized internally that all of the teams were reinventing the wheel. They were all building these infrastructure services that didn't scale beyond their own services, and they were spending too much of their time on the undifferentiated parts of their features, which was the infrastructure, as opposed to what differentiated the product and feature. And so we kind of figured if Amazon, which is a technology company at its heart, had this issue, that probably other companies did as well. And then a third thing that was going on around that time was we did this offsite at Jeff's house, and we were doing an exercise that we thought would take us 30 minutes where we were looking at what our core competencies were. And we started off saying, well, we're really good at having a lot of selection, and we're also really good at having the ability to fulfill that selection. But as we pushed ourselves to think a little bit more deeply, we realized we had gotten really good at building infrastructure services deep in the stack. So things like compute and storage and database and analytics and machine learning and things like that. And we'd had to get good at running and building reliable, cost-effective, scalable data centers because our retail business is such a low-margin business. And we kind of had up on the whiteboard at the time consumers, and then all the services we were building for consumers, and then sellers and the various capabilities we were building for sellers. And we wrote down developers, and we asked ourselves, do you believe that developers would build applications from scratch on these infrastructure services if they existed? And we believed that they would if they existed. And then we said, well, what are the, if you believe that, then what happens is the operating system kind of becomes the internet, which is a really different model than what's existed in the past. And if there's going to be an internet operating system, what are the key components and what's already been built? And what, given what Amazon's good at, could we contribute to? And when we looked at that in mid-2003, we realized that none of those key components of that internet operating system had been built. And when we thought about what we were good at Amazon, which we've always thought of ourselves as a technology company, we realized we could build all of those key components of that internet operating system. And with that, really, I left that shadow job to go work with a group of people to explore how to build a set of services that allowed any developer to build any application they could imagine on top of our infrastructure services. And that's how we got going with AWS in late 2003.
Yeah, that's just really inspiring. I remember this conversation was met with so much skepticism and excitement at the same time at that point in time. It's also amazing to witness the impact cloud computing has had on the rate of change around us. How have you seen AWS play its part in accelerating innovation? And given that we all have been through COVID, I'm curious to know if COVID has changed how businesses are embracing technology.
Yeah, well, I think the cloud has had a really substantial impact on both the new companies that have gotten started the last 15 years and existing companies reinventing themselves. And I think that the reasons that companies are adopting the cloud so quickly are a fewfold. I think first, almost always cost is the conversation starter. For most companies, if you don't have to lay out all that capital for data centers and for servers ahead of what you know the demand's going to be, and instead can spend it as you consume it, it's very appealing. So you get to turn capital expense into a variable expense, and then it's a lower variable expense than what virtually any company can do on its own, just because we have such large scale that we keep passing on to our customers in the form of lower prices, that you have a lower variable cost. And then you get real elasticity. So you don't, anyone who's had to provision infrastructure knows you've got to guess how much you're going to need. And you can either provision just enough and risk that if you don't have enough, that you'll have an outage for customers. So hardly anybody does that. So what they do is they provision for the peak. And there's a reason they call it the peak. It's because you don't live at the peak that long. And so you're sitting on all this wasted capital. And so in the cloud, you don't have to make that guess. You provision what you need. If it turns out you need more, you just seamlessly scale up. And if it turns out that you've reached a peak and don't need it anymore, you just give it back and stop paying for it. And so, cost is almost always the conversation starter. However, I would say that the number one reason that companies of any size choose to use the cloud is it just allows them to innovate at a much more rapid rate. And, in the on-premises model, if you need a server to try something, it typically takes you 10 to 12 weeks to get that server. And if you get something you want to roll out, it takes even longer. And then you got to build all those infrastructure services I was talking about we were doing internally that at Amazon that led us to believe this might be an interesting idea. In the cloud, you can spin up thousands of servers in minutes. And then we have over 200 services that customers can mix and match and use in whatever way they want and only pay for what they use. So you get from an idea to implementation in several orders of magnitude faster. So agility and speed of innovation is the number one reason people move. People also love the fact that they don't have to have their scarce resources work on the undifferentiated heavy lifting of infrastructure and instead get to work on what differentiates their product. And that if they have customers all over the world, they don't have to try and find data centers in all these different countries that they trust and that are cost effective. They can build their application and then easily deploy it in the regions or the clusters of data centers we have all over the world. So those are some of the things that have caused people to adopt the cloud so quickly. And, it started off in the early days that it was mostly startups that were building on top of AWS. And some of the most successful startups in the world built their businesses from scratch on top of AWS. These are companies like Pinterest and Airbnb and Stripe and Slack and Instagram and Dream11, Paytm, Swiggy. I mean, it's a big group of startups that have, from the very start, have built their businesses on top of the cloud, and it's what they rely on. But part of what's happened over the last 6 to 8 years as enterprises and governments have started using the cloud in such a big way is that they're just completely reinventing not just their companies, but what's possible. And there are loads of examples. But, one you've seen during the pandemic is just, if you look at what Moderna did in building their COVID-19 vaccine, they basically built a digital manufacturing suite on top of AWS using compute and storage and machine learning and data warehousing. And they built their COVID-19 vaccine candidate in 42 days on top of AWS when it normally takes them 20 months. Those are big differences in terms of what you can get done. Now, in COVID, what's interesting is that most companies in the world, including Amazon for that matter, have tried to find ways to save money however they could, and which for very obvious reasons. And our team in AWS has spent actually the majority of our time in the field trying to help customers save money wherever they could, because our business model works in such a way where we only succeed if our customers do over a long period of time. So we're naturally aligned. But while so many companies have sought to save money, what we've also seen is that a lot of large companies have used the discontinuity of the pandemic to step back and think about what they want to change strategically. And one of the things they've decided is that they don't want to run their own on-premises infrastructure, that they want the cost and they want the innovation and agility advantages and the productivity of their resources that the cloud gives them. And so lots of conversations that were conversations for a really long period of time where you had enterprises kind of dipping their toe in the water on plans, have pretty dramatically changed to action plans and pretty aggressive plans. And I think that when it's all said and done, none of us would have wished for the pandemic. And I think we're all very eager to be beyond the pandemic, but it will end up having accelerated cloud adoption in large companies by a few years.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have witnessed some of this even in, and when we think about really small businesses in India, and just the way they have adopted the cloud and simple software to digitize their operations and bring in customers when their offline footfalls were disrupted. It's just very inspiring to see. Let's talk a little bit about you. I would love to have you share a little bit about your evolution as a leader. It's fascinating to see how you have scaled. What mechanisms have you relied on to scale yourself and the business itself?
Well, I think as you know, and a lot of the leaders who are watching this know that when you run anything of any meaningful size, you can't be doing most of it yourself, and you can't be in all the meetings. And so two things become very important. One is you just have to have a great team. And I think that everybody says that they need a great team, and everybody says they have a great team, but it's hard to have the right team, especially as you go through different evolutions of growth. There are some people who kind of make that evolution all the way through, and there are other people who are great leaders at certain points of the journey and are probably not the right leaders at other parts. They may have really important roles in the company, but you have to kind of keep very honestly evaluating whether you have the right group to allow you to scale the business the way you need to at the speed that you need to, because speed really matters in all these areas. So one is you just need the right leaders, and you have to keep constantly reevaluating that. And then the second is really building a set of mechanisms that allow you to be able to see the things that matter most to you, and be able to see what's working or what's not and course correct quickly. And as you know, at Amazon, we talk a lot about the difference between good intentions and mechanisms. And a good intention would be my saying to one of our service teams, hey, you really have to make sure that the service performs adequately for customers, that they have a good customer experience. And they would say, you're right, of course, that's our focus, but that you're just relying on good intentions. A mechanism is a repeatable process that you're able to run regularly, where you inspect certain things as a group and allow you to see what's working and what's not working in as quantitative a way as you can, and then allow the group together to be able to course correct when you're off track. And so, the equivalent mechanism for making sure your service performs well is you need service level agreements. And in many cases, we have service level goals, which is even a higher commitment than a service level agreement. And you inspect that together every week. And you have to figure out for yourself, what are the mechanisms that are most important for you to manage? I spend a full day typically every year in between the Christmas and New Year's holidays here in the US, just thinking about the mechanisms that I have been a part of the last year and which ones we should continue doing, which ones we should do less frequently, which ones should continue, but I just don't need to spend the time myself in that mechanism, or which ones we should just stop doing, and which ones we should add. And that's some of the most important leverage planning that I do, because by nature of picking the mechanisms, you're deciding what are the things that you're going to pay the most attention to on a regular basis. And I think I try to pick ones that I think either are disproportionately important to customers, or that are real risks or opportunities to get right or to not get right. And I have some that I do weekly, some that I do monthly, some I do quarterly, some I do twice a year. I try to, some of the ones that I try to do weekly, I also just try to pick the inputs as opposed to the outputs that I think really matter. I think oftentimes teams can get too focused on the outputs. The ultimate output for a company is its share price, a public company, or its free cash flow, or its revenue, but you can't really manage the outputs. It's the inputs that drive the outputs. So we spend most of our time focused on what are the inputs that matter most for the business and how to drive those. So if you sat in, and you have probably sat in on our weekly business review, Amit, it's not a typical business review. We spend very, very little time in the 90 minutes on the actual revenue numbers because we have all these different ways of understanding those regularly. Instead, we're spending time on the inputs that matter most to us. So things like, what are the customer experience issues that our customers are struggling with most, and how do we actually help solve those quickly and apply more resource there? Or how are we doing against our key goals for the year, the things that we've decided matter most? Or what's our, we have a marketing calendar we look at, which started with making sure that we just didn't launch over one another because we have all these decentralized teams, but it's really turned into a roadmap review. And if you're off track on something, if you can figure that out early, you can apply more resource there before it's too late to make the deliverable that you know is important to the business. And then finally, we get to some of the numbers in the business. And so I think just trying to have mechanisms that allow you to identify what matters most to the business and evaluate the inputs on those has been, arguably outside of people, the most important scaling mechanism for all of us in growing AWS.
Thank you, Andy. That's really helpful. And I can speak for my own journey at Amazon, how mechanisms have really helped me scale as well, as I've kind of gone through different stages of scaling. Now we have thousands of entrepreneurs joining us here who are in different phases of scaling their businesses. I think one of the questions that they would want to know more about is, how do you keep innovating as you're scaling your business? What can they learn from your journey?
I think that it starts with the leadership team and the culture inside the organization really having the passion and will to keep inventing. And there are a lot of times where companies are very inventive in their early stages and they enjoy a certain amount of success and they get bigger, and either the nature of who's there or people get content, or you bring in people from outside who don't feel the urgency quite the same way, and organizations get more lax about inventing. So it starts with having a culture that really wants to invent, that sees that as a core part of who they are and what they do and what will make them successful today and in the future. And then I think you got to hire the right people that fit what you're trying to do. And I think at Amazon, we disproportionately index in trying to hire builders. And we think of builders as people who like to invent, people who look at customer experiences and try to dissect what's not working and seek to reinvent them. People who get that launch is the starting line and not the finish line. In technology, there are a lot of V1 people who love getting to launch and then lose interest. And nothing that we're all building that's successful hardly ever catches lightning in a bottle on day one. You have to keep listening to customers and iterating on their behalf. So it really starts with having the will to invent, hiring builders, and then organizing them as best as you can into separable and autonomous teams where they own their own destiny. In the early days of Amazon, you may remember this, we were organized more functionally. And so when things didn't get done, you'd have the engineering team say, well, this would have gotten done faster if the requirements were clearer. And the product managers would say, well, if engineering was on time, this would have been done faster. And teams would say, well, the reason this is such a mess is that engineering built it and threw it over the wall and gave it to us. And what we found over time was that if we built these single-threaded teams where all these folks were on the same team and they owned something important end-to-end, all that finger pointing went away. They owned it together. They got deep on their customers and their space together. They were able to recognize when they should change their roadmap. And you also found teams that felt much more empowered because they owned their own destiny. They didn't have to wait for somebody else. And so I think organizing in those smaller teams has helped. And then, we give our builders here the same building blocks that we give all of our external customers, which is, AWS. And I think that a lot of people have focused on AWS the last 10 years or so, but I think the speed with which our consumer businesses in Amazon have invented, India being, one of the prime examples, is just, in my opinion, very, very impressive. And I think a lot of those teams would share that one of the big reasons they're able to invent at the pace they have is because they're able to use AWS. And then I think a couple more things. I think as companies get larger, a lot of times the leadership team walks into meetings on new product ideas looking for ways to say no. And it's not because they're ill-intended. It's just that a lot of teams, as they get bigger, they get more conservative, or it feels overwhelming to add one more project in the middle of the year. And at Amazon, I think the opposite is true. I think that all of us would say that our favorite meetings are the ones where we're getting to evaluate new ideas. And we don't say yes to everything. We're pretty rigorous about it. But the leaders in the room are really trying to problem solve to get to yes. And I think we say yes to a lot more ideas than most companies. I think the last thing is that if you're going to invent and you're going to have that penchant and that motor inside the culture to invent, you're also going to have to accept that you're going to fail sometimes. And that's hard at most companies, including Amazon, where we hire achievement-oriented type A people that hate failing and yet have had to come to terms with the fact that some of the things they do are going to fail. And I think you could always tell people who've been at Amazon for a while by their ability to tell you about some of the things they've worked on that haven't worked out. And I think the key to that, again, is what we were talking about earlier around outputs and inputs. When you're inventing, you can't predict if the output you produce is going to be something that changes customers' behavior. But what you can control is you can control the inputs. You can control the team you build, the working backwards definition of the product, the technology quality you build, the timeliness with which you deliver, the thoughtfulness and how you engage customers. And so I always thought, our phone experiment obviously didn't work, but I always found it culturally reaffirming, because even though it turned out that consumers didn't react to the value proposition that we thought could be differentiating, the inputs on the phone were really good. And so we took that technology and used it in other initiatives, and we took the people that did a really good job on the inputs and helped them land in important other gigs and spots. And that's really important, because if it's a career-limiting move to try working on new initiatives, you won't get your great people working on the inventions, and you need them to do so. So I think those are some of the things that we have found useful in continuing to try to innovate even when you're scaling.
Yeah, I think as we talk about invention, I would point out that you are in the midst of thousands of Indian SMBs. They're unique in their resourcefulness and inventiveness, and I've had the good fortune to interact with so many of them in my last 7+ years in India. The India team considers itself very fortunate to be able to come in every day and think about how we can serve and empower them and unleash their potential. Actually, last year, Jeff made a prediction that the 21st century is likely to be the Indian century. And we pledged to digitize 10 million SMBs, enable 10 billion in exports, and create 1 million jobs by 2025. I know you have something to add as we double down on that pledge. The folks out here would love to hear more about it.
Well, you make a great point, Amit. I think that small and medium-sized businesses are often the engine and the lifeblood of economies, and I think it's true in India as well. And we are very passionate about trying to enable acceleration of small and medium-sized businesses in fueling innovation and the economy in India. And so, building on what we did last year, I'm excited to announce a brand new $250 million Amazon Smbhav venture fund, where we're going to help inspire more SMBs to be able to build brand new businesses. Maybe you'll share a few details about that, Amit.
Thank you, Andy. I would love to. Amazon is committed to unlocking the possibilities of a digital India and realize the vision of an Atmanirbhar Bharat as put forward by the Honorable Prime Minister. The Amazon Smbhav Venture Fund, as you pointed out, is targeted at empowering the best ideas and attracting missionary entrepreneurs out there to join us in this journey. To start with, amongst other things, the fund is going to focus on 3 big priorities: SMB digitization, agri-tech innovations to empower farmer productivity and reach, and health tech to provide universal and quality healthcare for citizens. Separately, I'm also excited to announce 2 additional initiatives. Now, we've been very excited by the success of this new program called Local Shops on Amazon, which we launched during COVID. And it's been adopted by tens of thousands of local shops around us. We are committed to bringing them online. And today we would like to announce that we are committing to bring 1 million local shops online on Amazon by 2025. Additionally, we realize that an Atmanirbhar Bharat is only possible when you're investing in empowering every region of India. So we are announcing a special initiative today. It's called Spotlight Northeast. We are honored to have Honorable Minister Jitendra Singh join us today to tell us more about this initiative. I would like to invite the Honorable Minister to tell us more. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to deliver this message at the Amazon's Smbhav 2021, an initiative aimed at equipping the small and medium businesses, startups, innovators, and powers of digitalization. It is indeed a great pleasure to see Amazon taking up leadership role in collaborating with businesses across the country to help them to adopt technology and also adapting their operations to the current times. Through this forum, I would also take the opportunity to congratulate Amazon for announcing yet another special initiative which is personally close to my heart and also closely associated with the kind of responsibility that I am assigned with as a part of the government. The initiative called Spotlight Northeast, which is aimed to boost the local economy, create jobs and accelerate businesses and empowerment of women across the 8 states of the northeastern region. Ladies and gentlemen, I am also pleased to learn and I wish to share this information with you that over the next 5 years, I have been given to understand that Amazon, along with the government organizations like the Northeastern Handicrafts and Handloom Development Corporation and the Tribal Cooperative Marketing Federation of India, will focus on bringing benefits of e-commerce to as many as 50,000 weavers, artisans and small businesses in the region by facilitating access to technology and markets, and additionally would bring 5,000 plus unique crafts, geographical indication products and other products on its India marketplace, and thus boost export of exclusive commodities of the region, like for example tea, honey, spices, etc. Friends, one of the key priorities of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the government headed by Prime Minister Modi is to establish Northeast as an important business destination in the entire Indian subcontinent. And the Northeast, as we all would agree, is a home to a number of unique arts, crafts and GI products which can be harnessed to boost entrepreneurship in the region, increase incomes and also generate livelihoods. Some of the unique GI products which I could mention here, for example, include the Jassy shawls from Nagaland, the Muga silk from Assam, different types of weaves like the Moirang Rufi from Manipur, varieties of teas and spices like the miso chili, and many more like this. Before I conclude, I convey my best wishes to the Amazon on rolling out this program and responding to the clarion call of Atmanirbhar Bharat by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And I am sure this initiative will use technology to take entrepreneurship, art, craft and culture of the Northeast region across India and across the world. This will also contribute positively to the government's plans of developing northeastern states and developing them into a commercial hub for introducing the world to the unique and locally crafted made in India produce from the region. I end by hoping that the outcomes of this undertaking and this initiative will provide a major boost to the local industry in the northeastern region and as a consequence also improve the standing of the northeastern region and in fact whole of India in the world arena. Thank you very much and best wishes once again.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for joining us to announce a very special initiative. So before we wrap up, Andy, much of what we have been talking about is about what we have done in India since Amazon.in was set up a little over 7 years. But people don't realize that Amazon actually established its first center in India back in 2003, marking nearly 18 years of commitment. Incidentally, our first center was focused on AWS, and I had the opportunity to be a part of that initiative when it was being set up. I don't want to embarrass you, but I was able to dig up a picture from that time, and I'm going to show it to the folks around. Can you tell us more about this time and maybe growth since then, and a little bit about the future of Amazon as you look forward?
Yeah, well, it's not hard to embarrass me. So congratulations. But that actually was a great day. I remember it. I think it was in 2004 or 2005, and that was during Holy Day and the celebration. And we had a missionary group of people in Bangalore from the very start, and you set up that team and that center for us, and we've had a very substantial presence in India for a long time now. For almost 20 years at this point, and a really big part of our success, not just in AWS, but in lots of businesses that Amazon operates. And I just find it really remarkable in the 7 years since we launched Amazon.in, just, the way that we have been able to help digitize 2.5 million small businesses, enabling $3 billion of exports, creating 1 million jobs, and that's just in 7 years. I mean, there is so much more to do, and we've made a pledge to do more, but it's very, very early days with respect to what we're hoping to enable for customers in India. And we're incredibly excited about what's happened and very appreciative of the partnership across all the various types of customers we get an opportunity and privilege to serve in India. But it's just, as I mentioned, it's just very early days with respect to what we see making possible in the future. And so we look forward to partnering over a long period of time in providing great customer experiences in India.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a real pleasure to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope all enjoyed this great fireside chat conversation with Andy Jassy. We look forward to having you all with us over the next 4 days as some of the brightest minds, innovators, and business leaders share their thoughts on digitizing India and tapping its position in the 21st century. Look forward to it.